The business class cabin buzzed with quiet tension. Polished shoes tapped against the floor. Designer handbags gleamed under the soft cabin lights, and impatient sighs filled the air. Among the sleek travelers was Clara Benson, a 30-year-old plus-size woman in a plain cardigan and loose skirt. She squeezed into her assigned seat, feeling the sting of eyes on her. A man in a tailor suit muttered, "Unbelievable," as she adjusted her seatbelt. Clara looked down, cheeks flushing. She was used to it, the sideways glances, the silent judgments. But here, at 30,000 feet, the weight of stairs felt heavier than ever. Behind her, a baby wailed, piercing and relentless. Heads turned sharply, brows furrowed in collective irritation. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle, trying to soothe passengers with rehearsed apologies. But the cries only grew louder, echoing through the cabin. Clara shifted uncomfortably, trying not to wince at the sound. The man beside her groaned. Of course, as if this flight wasn't miserable enough. Clara glanced back briefly. A young child, red-faced and kicking, thrashed in his father's arms. The man holding him looked exhausted but determined, whispering words drowned out by the baby's screams. He wore a suit even finer than the others. Passengers whispered, their voices sharp as knives. Can't he control his own baby? What's someone like that doing here anyway? The murmurs grew, mixing irritation with cruel assumptions. Clara kept her eyes forward, but she felt each comment cut through her chest. She recognized the father now, Jonathan Hale, Billionaire CEO, often splashed across magazines for his wealth and power. The same people who now glared at him with annoyance would have begged for his attention in another setting. But here, with his child inconsolable, he was just another disruption. Even money couldn't quiet disdain in a pressurized cabin. Jonathan bounced his son, murmuring softly, but the cries only sharpened. The baby's tiny fists clenched, his wails echoing like alarms. Flight attendants hovered, offering toys, blankets, even warm milk, but nothing soothed him. Passengers shifted angrily in their seats, sighing louder, glaring openly. Clara's heart ached. She knew what it was to be stared at as if you didn't belong. The baby's cries weren't her fault, yet she felt the familiar sting of shared judgment. She twisted her hands in her lap, debating, until a woman across the aisle sneered. Can't someone make it stop? The words lit a spark inside her. Clara unbuckled her seatbelt slowly, ignoring the raised brows around her. She turned toward Jonathan, who was pacing now, his son wailing against his chest. "Excuse me," Clara said softly, her voice trembling but steady enough. Jonathan looked up, his eyes heavy with fatigue and worry. I've helped with children before. Would you like me to try?" For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, laughter erupted from a man nearby. "Her? What could she possibly do?" A woman snorted, muttering, "She can barely fit in her seat, and she thinks she'll calm a baby?" Clara's cheeks burned, but she held Jonathan's gaze. To her surprise, there was no mockery in his eyes, only desperation and hope. He shifted his son slightly, hesitant. "You really think you can help?" Clara nodded. "Sometimes they just need a different rhythm, a different feel." Jonathan studied her, then handed the baby over, his hands lingering protectively. The child squirmed, wailing louder as he changed arms. Passengers rolled their eyes, bracing for more noise. But Clara cradled the baby against her chest, humming softly, swaying with slow, deliberate motion. Her body, often mocked, now became a steady refuge. The cries faltered, then softened. Passengers stilled. Clara kept humming, a lullaby her grandmother had sung to her. She patted the baby's back gently, her warmth surrounding him. The little boy's sobs dwindled into hiccups, his tiny hand clutching her blouse. Within minutes, the wails faded into silence. His breathing steadied. His eyes fluttered shut. The cabin, filled moments ago with irritation, now pulsed with stunned quiet. Clara exhaled slowly, rocking gently, her voice low and tender. She dared not look up. afraid the spell would break. But she felt the shift. Mockery had turned into astonished disbelief. Jonathan's shoulders sagged in relief. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes fixed on his now sleeping son. How did you do that? He whispered. Clara smiled faintly, still rocking. Sometimes they just need to feel safe. She didn't mention the years she had spent helping neighbors with children, the instinct she had carried since she was young. Jonathan's gaze softened, gratitude playing on his face. Around them, passengers exchanged glances, their earlier irritation replaced by awkward silence. No one laughed now, no one sneered. Clara had silenced not just the baby but the entire cabin. The man who had mocked earlier cleared his throat, avoiding Clara's eyes. The woman who had scoffed busied herself with her phone, cheeks flushed. Even the flight attendant seemed stunned, hovering nearby with uncertain smiles. Clara kept her focus on the baby, unwilling to let herself savor victory yet. She had learned long ago that praise could vanish as quickly as scorn. But inside, a spark of pride flickered. For once, her size wasn't the subject of ridicule. It was part of the reason she could hold the child so steadily, provide the warmth he needed. Jonathan leaned closer, his voice low. You have no idea what this means to me. He hasn't stopped crying since we left the house this morning. Clara shook her head gently. You don't need to explain. Babies feel more than we realize. They feel stress, exhaustion, loneliness. Her words surprised even herself, but Jonathan nodded slowly, as if they carried truth he had long suspected. For a moment, his powerful aura faded, and he looked simply like a tired father, grateful to a stranger who had done the impossible. Clara shifted, easing the baby into a more comfortable rest. The flight attendants finally spoke. That was incredible, one whispered, her tone tinged with awe. Another added, we tried everything. Clara offered a small smile, shrugging. Sometimes it's just about patience. She didn't say how often patience had been her only weapon against judgmental stares, against whispered insults, against loneliness. Jonathan watched her closely, his eyes narrowing slightly, as if seeing her for the first time, not as background, not as invisible, but as someone who had done what no one else could. Clara lowered her gaze, unused to being the center of attention for anything good. The cabin slowly returned to normal. Passengers shifted back into their routines, laptops reopening, magazines rustling, but the energy had changed. No one dared mock Clara now. Some even smiled awkwardly as she passed, still cradling the sleeping baby. She eased back into her seat, the child nestled against her chest. Jonathan sat beside her, leaning slightly toward them, his gaze softer than anyone had ever seen. I don't even know your name, he admitted quietly. Clara hesitated, then said, Clara. He nodded. Clara, thank you. The simplicity of his words carried more weight than she expected. As the hours passed, the baby slept soundly in Clara's arms. Jonathan dozed lightly beside them, his hand occasionally resting protectively near his son. Clara stayed awake, unwilling to risk disturbing the child. Her arms ached, but she didn't care. She studied his tiny features, the way his breathing steadied in sync with hers. She thought about all the times she had been told she wasn't good enough, not worthy, not pretty, not thin. Yet here, in the quiet hum of an airplane cabin, she was the one who had made a difference. That truth warmed her more than any blanket. When the baby finally stirred, Clara soothed him again with gentle pats until he blinked sleepily, calm now instead of frantic. Jonathan sat up quickly, worry flashing before relief softened his features. Clara handed the boy back carefully, her arms tingling from holding him so long. He'll be fine now, she said softly. Jonathan's voice cracked with gratitude. I don't know how to thank you, she shook her head. You don't need to, but his expression said otherwise. For a man who had everything, gratitude didn't come easily. Yet here, for her, it was real. The plane descended, city lights glittering below. Passengers gathered their belongings, stretching stiff limbs. Clara tucked herself inward again, shrinking as attention faded. She expected things to return to normal, mockery, dismissal, invisibility. But as she stood to leave, a woman who had sneered earlier touched her arm lightly. You were amazing, she whispered, unable to meet Clara's eyes. Clara offered a polite nod, unsure how to respond. For once, the sting of their earlier cruelty didn't pierce as deeply. She had seen their judgment break, and she had been the reason. At the gate, Jonathan adjusted his son on his hip, glancing toward Clara. She walked a few steps ahead, trying not to linger, but he called out, "Clara." She turned, startled. He caught up, his son reaching tiny fingers toward her as if unwilling to let go. Jonathan smiled faintly. "You don't know it, but you saved me today." Clara shook her head. "I just helped your baby." "No," he said firmly. "You helped me." His voice was steady, sincere. For a woman used to being dismissed, the words landed like a gift she hadn't known she needed. They walked together toward baggage claim, Jonathan balancing his son while Clara clutched her warm purse. People stared at the billionaire, at the plus-size woman beside him, but Jonathan didn't seem to care. He matched her pace, even slowed when she did. For Clara, the moment felt surreal, like stepping into someone else's life. She half expected him to vanish into a waiting car, leaving her invisible again. But he stayed close, his presence grounding her in ways she couldn't explain. The weight of the day pressed on her shoulders, but for once, it didn't feel crushing. It felt shared. At the carousel, Jonathan turned to her. "I'd like to repay you. May I have your number?" Clara blinked, startled. "My number?" He nodded. "I might need a nanny, or at least someone who knows how to calm this little tornado." Clara laughed softly, shaking her head. "I'm not a nanny." He tilted his head, studying her. "Maybe not, but you're something rare, someone who sees beyond the noise." His words left her speechless. She scribbled her number on a scrap of paper, unsure why she gave it, but knowing she couldn't say no. As Jonathan's driver approached, Clara stepped back, ready to fade into the crowd again. But the baby reached for her, tiny arms outstretched. Clara's chest tightened. Jonathan adjusted his hold, smiling softly. "Looks like you made a friend." Clara nodded, her throat too tight for words. She turned away before tears could rise, her footsteps heavy, but her heart strangely light. For once, she wasn't leaving empty. She carried something intangible but powerful proof that she mattered, even to those who once dismissed her. Proof that sometimes being overlooked was only the beginning of being truly seen. That night, in her small apartment, Clara replayed the day in her mind. The stares, the laughter, the humiliation, and then the silence as the baby slept in her arms. She thought of Jonathan's eyes, the gratitude in his voice, the unexpected kindness. She lay in bed, hugging herself, whispering into the dark, "You are more than they think." For years, she had survived judgment. Now, for the first time, she had risen above it. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she knew this. Her life had already begun to change, 30,000 feet above the ground. The following week, Clara returned to her routine: early mornings at the library, part-time work at the grocery store, evenings spent alone in her modest apartment. The memory of the fly still lingered, like a dream she wasn't sure had really happened. She half expected the scrap of paper she had given Jonathan to remain untouched in his pocket, lost to the noise of his busy life. After all, she was no one special, just a plus-sized woman scraping by in a world that rarely offered her kindness. But 3 days later, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Clara hesitated, thumb hovering. Finally, she answered. "Clara Benson?" The voice on the other end was deep, unmistakable. "Jonathan." She almost dropped the phone. "I hope this isn't a bad time," he said, "but my son hasn't stopped crying today. I thought of you." Clara's breath caught. He had thought of her. She agreed to come, her heart hammering. She told herself it was just about the baby, nothing more. Yet, a quiet thrill whispered otherwise. Jonathan's penthouse towered above the city, its glass walls glowing with evening light. Clara felt out of place as the elevator carried her upward, her reflection staring back from polished steel. She adjusted her cardigan, wishing she looked different, wishing she belonged. The doors opened to reveal Jonathan, holding his son, fatigue etched across his face. Relief flickered in his eyes when he saw her. "You came," he said simply. Clara nodded, stepping inside, her nerves buzzing louder than the city below. The baby recognized her instantly, tiny arms reaching. Clara gathered him close, her soft frame cradling him with ease. His cries softened within minutes, just as they had on the plane. Jonathan watched silently, amazement clear on his face. "I don't understand it," he admitted. "No one else can calm him like you." Clara smiled faintly. "Sometimes babies just know who they can trust." Jonathan's gaze lingered on her longer than necessary, and she felt warmth creep into her cheeks. Over the next weeks, Jonathan called more often, sometimes for his son, sometimes Clara suspected for himself. She found herself at his penthouse in the evenings, reading softly to the baby, humming lullabies, sometimes just sitting in quiet company. Jonathan, always so powerful in public, seemed human here. Stripped of boardrooms and headlines, they shared coffee late into the night, conversations drifting from business to books to childhood memories. Clara realized she was laughing more than she had in years, but not everyone approved. Jonathan's staff eyed her with thinly veiled disdain. "She's just a babysitter," one whispered. Others smirked behind polished glass walls, their expressions dripping with judgment. Clara felt the sting but said nothing. She had endured worse. Still, she worried. What if Jonathan heard their whispers? What if he believed them? She carried the old fear that her body, her size, would always overshadow her worth. It haunted her even in moments of happiness. One evening, after the baby had fallen asleep, Jonathan poured them both tea. They sat in silence, the city lights sprawling beneath them. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know what they said about you at the office?" Clara stiffened, bracing for cruelty. "They called you ordinary." Her heart sank, but Jonathan leaned closer, eyes steady. "They're wrong. You are extraordinary. You calmed my son when no one else could. You've brought peace into this home. That's not ordinary, Clara. That's rare." Her throat tightened. For the first time in years, she felt seen. Their bond deepened quietly, steadily. Clara became part of the rhythm of Jonathan's life, though she tried not to think too far ahead. She told herself she was just helping with the baby, nothing more. But when Jonathan smiled at her across the kitchen table, or when his hand brushed hers as he passed the cup, her heart betrayed her. She wanted more, yet fear kept her silent. What if he saw her only as useful? What if she ruined the fragile place she had carved for herself? The turning point came at a charity gala. Jonathan insisted she accompany him, not as staff but as a guest. Clara nearly refused. The idea of stepping into a room filled with elegant women in designer gowns made her stomach twist, but Jonathan's voice was firm. "I want you there." And so she found herself in a simple navy dress, nerves coiled tight as cameras flashed and whispers trailed behind her. Who's she? She doesn't belong here. Each word stung like glass. But Jonathan never left her side, his presence shielding her like armor. Inside the ballroom, the whispers grew louder. Clara kept her head down, wishing she could vanish. But then Jonathan did something unexpected. During his speech, in front of hundreds, he spoke of compassion, resilience, and the courage to rise above judgment. His gaze found Clara's in the crowd. Sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones the world overlooks. Her breath caught. He hadn't said her name, but everyone knew. Heat rushed to her cheeks, but this time it wasn't shame, it was pride. After the gala, the car ride was quiet. Clara stared out the window, heart racing. Finally, Jonathan broke the silence. "I know what people said tonight," she swallowed. "It doesn't matter. It does," he countered. "Because they're wrong." His hand brushed hers, lingering for a heartbeat. Clara's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, her story could end differently than she had always feared. Still, doubt gnawed at her. Late that night, Alone in her apartment, she stood before the mirror. Same body, same curves, same woman who had been mocked on the plane. Could she really believe she deserved him? Could someone like Jonathan ever see her as more than convenient? Tears welled, but then she remembered his words at the gala. Extraordinary. She repeated it softly to herself, a mantra against the storm of self-doubt. Extraordinary. Jonathan didn't let the moment fade. In the days that followed, he invited Clara to business dinners, charity meetings, even casual outings with his friends. At first, people whispered. But over time, they saw what he saw, her calm presence, her quiet strength, her ability to soothe not just his son, but him as well. Slowly, the mockery turned to curiosity, then to respect. Clara, once invisible, was now impossible to ignore. Yet, the harshest test came not from strangers, but from Jonathan's own family. His sister, elegant and ruthless, confronted Clara one evening. Do you really think you belong here? He deserves someone who matches his world, not you. The words cut deep. Clara almost walked away that night, convinced the sister was right. But Jonathan stopped her. His voice was still. Don't ever let anyone decide your worth, Clara. Not even my family. His defense was fiercer than she expected, and it anchored her when she would have drifted back into invisibility. As months passed, Clara's confidence grew. She still battled doubt, still heard echoes of old insults, but she carried herself differently now. She walked into rooms with her head higher, her steps steadier. Jonathan's son clung to her with laughter and joy, calling her his comfort. And Jonathan himself, his glances grew warmer, his smiles softer. There were moments quiet, electric, when the air between them felt heavy with possibility. One evening, as they watched the city lights from his balcony, Jonathan finally spoke what had lingered unsaid. Clara, you changed my life. You changed my son's life. And if I'm honest, you've changed me. She turned, heart pounding. He stepped closer. I don't see you the way others do. I see strength. I see compassion. I see the woman who calmed storms no one else could. His hand found hers, firm and certain. And I don't want to imagine my life without you. Clara's breath caught. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they weren't from shame. They were from wonder, from disbelief, that someone had finally seen her, wholly and without judgment. She whispered, Are you sure? His answer was steady, unwavering. I've never been more sure. In that moment, all the years of mockery, all the whispers on the plane, all the times she had been overlooked, dissolved into nothing. For the first time, she wasn't invisible. She was chosen. Their relationship deepened openly after that night. Clara no longer felt the need to shrink herself, to hide in corners. She stood beside Jonathan proudly, not as a helper, not as a background figure, but as a partner. The world still whispered, of course, but whispers no longer held power over her. She had faced worse and survived. Now, she thrived. Months later, as they boarded another flight together, Clara paused in the aisle, memories flooding back of the day everything had changed. Passengers stared again at the billionaire, at the plus-sized woman beside him, but this time, Jonathan held her hand firmly. His son nestled happily in her other arm. The same cabin that once rang with judgment now hummed with quiet acceptance. Clara smiled softly, realizing she had rewritten her story at 30,000 feet. That night, in the quiet of their home, Clara reflected on her journey. She remembered the humiliation, the pain, the loneliness. But she also remembered the moment she chose courage over fear, when she reached out to a crying child despite ridicule. That single act had changed everything. She whispered to herself, "You are more than they think." And this time, she didn't just believe it, she lived it. For Clara had found love, respect, and a family where once there had only been emptiness. Her life, mocked into silence, now sang with possibility.